Welcome to Up Next, How South Carolina Healthcare is Taking on COVID-19. This one-hour conversation will provide a current snapshot of our state's healthcare climate now and the path forward. Many of you joining know us at SCbio, and for those of you that are not as familiar with our organization, we will share a bit more to help frame today's conversation. SCbio is a nonprofit organization representing the life science industry. As a public-private association and economic development organization, SCbio actively promotes, builds, advances, and convenes the industry in our state. SCbio works to create the nation's most industry-friendly and innovative life sciences ecosystem and business environment to fuel the knowledge economy in South Carolina. There are more than 650 life science firms in the Palmetto State. They are represented with circles on this map. The industry is broken into 6 major segments, including pharmaceuticals, medical devices and equipment, research testing and labs, digital health solutions, distribution, and bioag. The innovative products and technologies produced by these businesses directly support the healthcare industry and, in turn, the patients. SCbio's role as storytellers for this sector has expanded to sharing information about our members and investors, including the healthcare providers who are finding solutions to battle COVID-19. We've also launched a job board on the SCbio website to serve as a resource for those furloughed or out of work, as well as those new graduates looking for employment. And we're working with our state partners to qualify companies supplying PPE to our hospitals and businesses reopening. SCbio is led by CEO Sam Konduros. Before taking the helm of SCbio 3 years ago, Sam spent 11 years with the Greenville Health System, most recently leading the Research Development Corporation at GHS, which is now PRISMA. Sam is a seasoned economic developer, having served in many roles, including CEO and founder of the Upstate South Carolina Alliance, chair of the Greenville Chamber, and is currently on the executive committee of the State Chamber. Sam will lead today's discussion. Sam, take us away.
Hello, thank you to everyone participating in this SCbio webinar this morning. It's great to have you, and we're going to jump right to it. As of yesterday evening, these are the reported facts around COVID-19. Globally, there are over 4.7 million cases, more than 317,000 deaths attributed to the coronavirus. Nationally, there are over 1.5 million confirmed cases currently, with more than 90,000 deaths, and gratefully over 288,000 confirmed recoveries. And here in South Carolina, presently, there are just under 9,000 cases based on the number of citizens tested, which ranks us 30th in total cases out of 50 states, in a state that ranks 23rd in population, with 391 deaths, 126 confirmed new cases yesterday, with some additional deaths reported in the past 24 hours. Those are the facts. The life sciences industry, the CDC, and other health agencies have a number of promising targeted treatments and therapies under rapid development, including remdesivir, an antiviral drug originally targeted for Ebola. There are several vaccines in the pipeline at present, but no vaccine will be approved and available for at least several months. And the immune response of people who have contracted COVID-19 or were actively exposed remains unclear at this point, based on the current level of data around antibody testing. As we do our best to safely reopen our economy, this is the somewhat alien world we've been living for much of 2020, and will likely continue to be the case for a number of months. With that backdrop, I'm grateful to have the privilege of moderating this extraordinary panel of South Carolina healthcare leaders and subject matter experts who will focus on how South Carolina healthcare has met the challenge of a global pandemic known as COVID-19 and will continue to do so going forward. While the multifaceted impacts of the coronavirus are staggering, frankly, from a public health standpoint, clearly from an economic standpoint, and even from a political and social standpoint, our webinar this morning will strategically focus on the major impacts on healthcare, both in South Carolina and the nation. What we've done, what we've learned, and where we go from here. While COVID-19 has clearly created enormous challenges for all of us, some of which are unprecedented in this modern era and in our own lifetimes, the healthcare industry has been on the absolute front lines of the global health crisis created by this mysterious and potentially lethal virus, with the life sciences industry striving to deliver solutions as quickly as possible as a highly engaged and supporting battle partner, if you will. While limitations, vulnerabilities, and even weaknesses have been revealed that we're collectively and aggressively addressing, there have also been amazing acts of goodwill and collaboration, awesome innovations and creativity, and silver linings that will not only enable us to successfully navigate our way through this crisis, but have us far better prepared for any future waves of this virus, future pandemics, or other emergencies, and an opportunity, frankly, to become stronger across the board. As you quickly learned in the brief opening segment of the webinar, SCbio is again a public-private, nonprofit, statewide economic development organization and industry association dedicated to its bold mission to build, advance, innovate, and grow the life science industry in our state, focused on the fact that our industry ultimately exists to primarily support the needs of healthcare and patients. As such, having a very engaged, dynamic, convergent relationship with our partners and collaborators in healthcare is absolutely vital, and it ensures that we're focused on the right priorities as a solution provider. With that background, I'm now honored to facilitate a discussion of 4 Palmetto State experts that each have a unique and relevant vantage point in the COVID-19 battle. The leader of the South Carolina Hospital Association, Thornton Kirby, 2 extraordinary clinical champions that were tapped by the state's 2 largest healthcare systems and academic health centers to spearhead responses to COVID-19, Dr. Danielle Scheurer of MUSC and PRISMA Health's Dr. Alain Litwin, and one of the state's top healthcare attorneys, Matthew Robertson of Nexsen Pruet. Over the next 50 minutes, our panelists will tackle a number of questions that have been posed by SCbio stakeholders, and we'll also be encouraging questions from our viewer participants that we will try to weave into this live, clearly live, dynamic conversation. To introduce our panelists now in a slightly untraditional way, I'm launching the conversation right in the deep end of the pool, so to speak, with a big question for each of them to address if desired, along with a question that uniquely corresponds with their organization and personal role. So, to all of our panelists, first and foremost, thanks for being here with us this morning. It's great to have you. I know you've had very busy lives recently. And the first big question would be, how has your perspective of healthcare delivery in America changed in any particular way as a result of the coronavirus, especially from your unique vantage point? And I'd like to start with Thornton Kirby as the highly experienced president CEO of South Carolina's Hospital Association since 2005. Thornton, which has you literally working shoulder to shoulder with almost 65 hospital CEOs throughout the state that your organization directly supports and advocates for. You've seen a lot over the past 15 years, but probably not anything quite like this. Please tell us a little bit about your statewide organization and role at this crucial time, how it's been directly impacted by a modern plague, as well as a current perspective on the state of healthcare in South Carolina as a result.
Thanks, Sam. Let me say a special thank you to all the members of the SCbio family. Just to start off, the support coming from SCbio partners in this state has been extraordinary for the hospital community. We can talk more about it throughout the call, but having friends come to the aid of hospitals has been really gratifying. It will not be forgotten, and we will do everything we can to continue this collaboration between the delivery side and the SCbio, the life sciences development side. So you asked about the Hospital Association. We are, I'm the CEO. We have been in existence for almost 100 years, and we have, in the last 15 years, since Hurricane Katrina, been very much in the business of helping hospitals in emergency preparedness. We work well with the hospitals themselves. We work well with DHEC, with the Emergency Management Division, and the Governor's Office whenever we have these crises. One of the things that I think is most telling, if you ask, how do I see healthcare changing? Our whole notion of emergency preparedness has to be challenged. And we have built a nation's emergency preparedness model around the idea of mutual aid. So when we have a hurricane in Florida, the power companies all flock from other states to Florida to help rebuild the infrastructure. Similarly with floods or tornadoes. Well, when every community in the country has the same problem, like a pandemic presents, there is no mutual aid to be given. The national stockpile didn't go to one particular location, it went to all locations. And so we've seen the whole notion of mutual aid challenged, and we'll think a lot more about how we can be self-sufficient at a state level? Should we have our own state level stockpile, for example? So that's one big issue. I think that another thing that I want to set up for a later conversation is the whole notion of high reliability science. Our hospitals in South Carolina have made a commitment over the last 5 or 6 years to try and build a highly reliable system of care. And that brings with it an entire new discipline that looks more like what we see in the US Navy or commercial aviation or the development of nuclear power. How is it that we can have a highly complex and hazardous activity with an exemplary safety record? And one of the ways we do that is by practicing high reliability science. Preoccupation with failure, making safety first above all, those kinds of things have been helpful to our hospitals. I think you'll hear more about that as we go. So that's one issue, is the whole idea of our approach to emergency preparedness. Another is the fragility of the supply chain. This is a term that Dr. Scheurer used when we were preparing. The fragility of the supply chain, and then the corresponding response by our society to scarcity. So you've all heard about personal protective equipment, or PPE. We've heard about drugs. We've heard about ventilators. We've heard about testing supplies and equipment. How have we responded to this as a nation? It challenges our ethical foundations. It challenges our reliance on foreign manufacturers. That is a question we're going to have to spend more time thinking about and talking about after it's all over. Another maybe less obvious but very important issue is the fact that this pandemic has really illuminated for many people the health disparities that exist in this country. And I know Dr. Litwin and others will speak to that, but it's become very clear in the press that we have disproportionate impacts of this disease on certain populations. For example, the African American population in this state represents about 27% of the total population, but about 44% of the cases and more than 50% of all deaths. Why is that? What are we not doing right? What should we do differently in the future? That's a really important question that's going to come out of this and is already being explored. Another topic would be the financial viability of hospitals after this COVID experience. This has been an extraordinary financial hit to hospitals, and we'll have to talk more about that, how we address that as a country, the pandemic. And I don't want to get into partisan politics, but it is very interesting to watch our country divide into red and blue states about when to reopen, whether to reopen. How do you balance the economy versus the health of the population? How do you use drug therapy, et cetera? So those are the big themes that I see, Sam, that I think will play out over the next months and years to come.
Thanks, Thornton. Great opening points. I know some of those we'll go deeper on with our other panelists as well. So moving on to Dr. Scheurer, or Danielle, if I may call you, is not only the medical director for health quality and safety at the Medical University of South Carolina, but also the outgoing medical editor of the Hospitalist and the new president, congratulations, of the Society of Hospital Medicine. With compelling in-depth experience in the treatment of hospitalized patients facing acute conditions and disorders that has been a center point of your career. Please briefly introduce us to your role at MUSC and how COVID-19 is impacting MUSC health and healthcare in this country, in your view.
I do thoroughly agree with everything that Thornton outlined. The one thing I would add that we've, very vividly noticed at MUSC Health that I think is a pattern that will continue is the need for healthcare organizations to really be very, very deeply focused on the patient and family voice. I do think it's always been a little bit ironic that as an industry, we tend to be very industry and provider focused, but we've always struggled quite a bit with being truly patient and family focused. And I think this has really brought to light some of those vulnerabilities in the healthcare system. What we're hearing from patients and families, and they're, talking with their feet, is one, that they have to have access to healthcare in ways that they've never required before, up to including virtual care and telehealth, et cetera. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about that during this panel. as the use of telehealth has very appropriately exploded during the COVID epidemic. And the other, unquestionably, is they are demanding safe care. We've always, as Thornton alluded to, in the state of South Carolina, we put a huge focus on high reliability. One of the core tenets of that is safety first. But without question, patients are telling us, again, with their voices and with them, their patterns of seeking care, is they are very hesitant to seek health care, not only for common conditions, but even for emergency conditions. As Thornton mentioned, that all healthcare organizations in the state, nation, and globally have taken a significant financial hit, primarily based on total volumes of patient care going down. And again, those volumes didn't just go down for routine care, such as preventive care, but we are seeing less patients seeking care for things such as heart attacks and strokes. And there's been, published literature around that. And the reason for that is that they still to this day do not feel safe seeking care in traditional ways. So those are the two things that I would add in addition to what Thornton already espoused. It's really around the demand for different types of access, including virtual care, as well as the need to triple down on safety first, and making sure that we can keep them safe while we take care of both COVID and non-COVID patients for the foreseeable future.
Okay, thanks so much, Danielle. And continuing with the clinician perspective, we move on to Dr. Litwin, or Alain. Alain is Vice Chair of Academics and Research for the Department of Medicine of the largest healthcare provider in South Carolina, as the designated leader of PRISMA Health's Rapid Innovation Task Force for COVID-19. And also your background as a public health expert and a researcher for many years, highly specialized in the impacts of the hepatitis C virus, particularly for vulnerable populations. Please share a little bit about your role at PRISMA and how that 30,000 employee health system has been impacted by COVID-19, as well as your view on public health in America right now.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Sam, for putting this together and inviting me to discuss with this great panel. I'm going to touch on two different opportunities here. Obviously, the COVID crisis has been very trying and tragic for many of us, and certainly working in healthcare, really our single greatest challenge in our lifetimes. But with these crises and these challenges bring unique opportunities, and it's really been a privilege to work together with a stellar group of leaders and innovators across our Health Sciences Center. Basically, we formed with this crisis the Rapid Innovation Task Force, which is a multidisciplinary team and includes leaders from PRISMA Health, University of South Carolina, Clemson University, and Furman University. So having this unique structure with these great innovators and great minds was very instrumental to being able to address the crisis. What we wanted to do was, and what we needed to do was solve real-time problems that were identified by our operational leaders as well as our frontline clinicians. And we needed to make connections with our academic and industry partners. So both local, industry, national, regional. Basically, we all need to work together in order to solve these problems. The old models weren't going to suffice. And so our overall goals of this Rapid Innovation Task Force is basically to develop innovative technology and strategies to overcome COVID-19, the pandemic, to develop new mechanisms for collaboration, not just during, but post-COVID, and to submit collaborative projects and so forth together. The problems that we were facing were the same ones that everyone was facing, really, around ventilation issues, around testing, around PPE, personal protective equipment, availability, and sterilization, around novel therapeutic agents to treat, and certainly a biggest challenge to public health that I've ever seen. And finally, to really create mechanisms so that frontline clinicians and other leaders would be able to vet their ideas the solutions can come amongst any of us, and really be able to have a structure to assess them rapidly and to raise those that are most meritorious to a level so we could find partners and operationalize some of these ideas. The second point I want to touch upon is what you had mentioned in the introduction there, is that, my career has been focused on developing and evaluating models of care for vulnerable populations, specifically those with addictions and comorbid infectious diseases, HIV and hepatitis C included. And this has been a crisis, the opioid epidemic, obviously, prior to the COVID epidemic or pandemic. What was noteworthy was that with this crisis, suddenly we all became vulnerable populations. The kind of challenges that had been facing kind of the more traditionally marginalized populations now are coming to all of us. Basic needs, how are we going to figure out, groceries and our very safety of being in our neighborhood, and neighborhoods that we assumed would be safe were no longer the same, type of situation where we couldn't leave our homes and so forth. And then the economic issues. But again, with that becomes opportunity. So we've been developing models for vulnerable populations. One of the big themes is you always have to work together with communities. Nothing about us without us. So you don't make solutions from an ivory tower and try to figure out how to solve those problems. But you need to, work with the multiple stakeholders together. So working with, again, the academic partners, with the industry partners, community-based organizations, government, of course, and organizations such as SCbio and SCRA. And together we can come up with these solutions. So it's been both a most challenging but also a very energizing time period, and it shows how quickly healthcare can pivot and accelerate, to solve problems not just for COVID, and we'll get into some of those details later, but also beyond, because we have many other problems that we need to solve that can leverage the mechanisms that we've developed and structures during COVID. I'll stop there.
Great, thanks, Alain. And as you clearly stated, it takes a village. It takes a lot of different talents and expertise to navigate through something like this. And that leads us finally to Matthew Roberts as chair of Nexsen Pruet's law firm healthcare practice. And you've had years, Matthew, of expertly advising, counseling healthcare providers across the state and country, frankly, on every conceivable issue that requires legal navigation. So you have a unique vantage point that is quite different from your fellow panelists here. How about provide a little background about your role, your firm's approach to healthcare, and how it's been directly impacted by COVID-19, and of course, what you see evolving nationally in healthcare as well.
Thanks, Sam. It has been a unique experience. 25 years of healthcare practice and the practice of law didn't prepare me for this, but we represent providers of all types, from hospitals to individual physicians to ASCs to other types of providers. And our experience here has been like the rest of the country. It's a new normal we're having to deal with every day. In terms of my perspective of the healthcare system, what's changed, I think I and others have a newfound respect and focus on public health and how important it is to all of us. It may not have been on people's high priority before this, but it is now. And we understand the linkage between public health and the economy, and public health and our ability to conduct our daily lives. And I think a lot of folks not in the healthcare industry did not appreciate that. And the folks on this panel certainly do and have done a lot to improve public health over the years. But what we've been working with providers is to help them navigate the already extremely complicated regulatory framework. And I've been impressed with both the federal and state government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic by relaxing the highly regulated environment as much as it could to allow providers and to allow businesses like the ones that SCbio represents to work together to help come up with some solutions to these unprecedented challenges that we have. So that's been a very positive thing, watching the reaction of the government to the private sector saying, do what you have to do to resolve this. I think we've seen the advent of telehealth, which in my opinion has been a long time coming, and we're glad to see that happen. But I think we're also seeing the focus on the supply chain and how fragile, to use Thornton and Danielle's word, it is. But as Dr. Litwin said, with these challenges, you have opportunities that come up. And I think there's opportunity to improve the supply chain, and companies that work with SCbio have stepped up and have tried to be resources for hospitals and other healthcare providers in the state. And that's been gratifying to see that happen and to see these industries work together. So we've got a lot more work to do, but I've been impressed with the provider community's reaction to this, and frankly, to the patients. I think they're still reluctant to go in for elective procedures, but I think we can get them there to get them more comfortable. But that goes back to understanding and appreciating public health and its importance in our daily lives.
Great opening comments from everybody. And I think we've kind of warmed up the room now, and we're going to move into just some more dynamic questions. And I want to encourage the panelists to jump in as they're inspired to do so. But we do have a load of questions. And I first, maybe on an encouraging note, we talked about challenges. We've talked about some really bright spots, but let's just stand with the positive. Each panelist, feel free to share, you know, one or two other unique innovations or initiatives that your organization undertook as part of your response to the public health crisis. And Danielle, let's start with you at MUSC, and not to prime the pump, but you were first in the nation at MUSC on something pretty cool. If you'd talk about that a little bit.
So yeah, I would say our unique contribution at the state level was around testing. So as you know, that has been a very controversial topic nationally. We still do not have adequate testing nationwide or in the state. And we recognized that this was going to be, frankly, an expectation for a place like MUSC Health to provide, ready access to testing, both diagnostic testing as well as serologic testing. And so we started ramping up our production very early on. And we sort of took a two-part strategy to it. One was, could we find an existing product that we could, buy, bring in-house, and start rapid production? And then the second is, can we make our own tests? And so we did both on the diagnostic side as well as the serologic side, kind of go down both of those pathways. On the diagnostic side, there are very good, rapid or fairly rapid diagnostic tests that we did bring in-house and have ramped up production there, which was pretty seamless. And we continue to provide, thousands of tests a day. On the serologic side, that took a little bit more time, energy, and thought. But long story short, we basically have sort of a hybrid approach to serologic testing, where we do have a commercial assay that we use, but we, in order to make it the best test possible, we have supplanted that with a second sort of reflex test that we worked in combination with USC and Clemson, essentially to build our own. So long story short, on serology tests, you want to test for as many proteins on the COVID-19 bug as you can to increase what we call the specificity, so that if you detect antibodies, you feel pretty confident that those are antibodies very specific to COVID-19. So to not bore you with the details, but we essentially have concocted a sort of a multi-step test to enhance the sensitivity and specificity. So I would say that was pretty innovative, and we are certainly proud to offer such testing widespread. Our capacity for serologic testing is extremely high, and we are nowhere near capacity.
That's great. And before I move to PRISMA, I want to recognize one element specifically. I was a very proud South Carolinian back in March when even the New York Times recognized that with the telemedicine center of excellence that MUSC is even known for, that the first drive-through COVID-19 test site at the Citadel Mall, Epic Center, that was supported by telemedicine took place, and it became a benchmark for many other states to try to replicate. So congratulations on that. Great to see that sort of innovative creativity happening right here in the Palmetto State. And then, Alain, I know a lot of cool things have been happening at PRISMA as well, and you've provided a lot of leadership. Danielle just talked about one that you may want to go a little further into, and that's a really unique collaboration between all three research universities and PRISMA in the development of a unique antibody test. But I think there's also something called the VESPR that you may want to share.
So I'm going to touch on rapidly 3 innovations. The first off was the Vesper that you discussed, and that came from one of our frontline clinicians. So this is a PRISMA Health emergency room physician, Sarah Ferris, and her husband, who's an engineer, Ryan Ferris, as well as one of our intensivist docs, pulmonary critical care docs, and Team Stembit. So they recognized the need, that ventilators were potentially running out across the world. And so could we use a single machine to breathe for multiple patients? So really cool effort, again, involving the local talent in terms of GE and Michelin engineers, initially printing initial prototypes for this Vesper device, and then working together with our Clemson and University of South Carolina engineers and teams to print refined prototypes. Finally, this was tested at our USC and Clemson simulation lab, at PRISMA Health. And then working closely with the University of South Carolina School of Medicine, Greenville, we were able to rapidly obtain EUA from the FDA within 1 week, working with all these different teams. And then finally, Ethicom, which is part of Johnson & Johnson medical device companies, were able to manufacture over 30,000 of these devices rapidly and distribute them to 33 states and 98 health systems. So again, a lot of the initiative and impetus came from, our friends in New York who, this was a reality where, fortunately in South Carolina, we haven't, run out of ventilators, but they were very close to running out in New York, and the amount of deaths per day in some of the health systems were, in the dozens, every day. Another from the PPE team, really been a pleasure working with Derek Peterson, a Furman entrepreneur in residence who worked with our task force to develop a reusable mask that seals tightly to the face and can be used with a variety of filter materials. So the mask design increases the surface area of the filter and basically holds promise for healthcare workers, other workers in high-risk environments. We hear about the meatpacking industry, and also the general public. And finally, for our novel therapeutics, very exciting developments. We were the first in the state to administer convalescent plasma, and Larry Gluck at the Cancer Center has really pioneered plasma exchange therapy in a unique study here in the state. And basically, plasma exchange as a process where you kind of take in patient's plasma and you can remove the inflammatory cytokines, potentially stable blood vessels, and reset the clotting pathways. And so again, this was a research study that just started in late April, so already enrolled several patients, with the initial patients, showing improvement in different parameters in terms of respiratory status and so forth. So this is a very early effort, but it's very exciting. We've been involved with also remdesivir, and all of these efforts really involve the partnerships with our academic teams, as well as our industry partners, local and beyond, as you see with Johnson & Johnson's. So I'll stop there.
Okay, no, thanks a lot. And it's been great. I know how complex innovation can be, and it often takes a lot of time and a lot of challenges to have so many different parties and entities coming together quickly to develop solutions. It was really exciting and encouraging. And on that note, Thornton, as a statewide association, I know SCHA has partnered with Commerce, with us, with the South Carolina Manufacturing Extension Partnership to, again, create rapid response and solutions quickly. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. As soon as the COVID numbers and figures started coming in around the country, and all of our caregivers realized, well, we're going to use a lot of PPE because every single person needs to be treated as though they are infectious. And every time in and out of the room, you have to put on a new set. The numbers became pretty staggering. And so we realized we don't have enough PPE for the projected kinds of patient surge that we might have if we had a Washington or a New York kind of experience. So we began trying to source. Our hospitals were trying to source from their normal suppliers all the PPE they would require. And we're really talking about N95 respirator masks. We're talking about surgical masks. We're talking about gowns, gloves, and face shields. Those are the 5 core pieces of PPE that we've really needed in very large supply. And as hospitals could not find sufficient quantities, they turned to us and said, hey, can you help us? Is anybody else finding it? And so we began trying to vet all these people. Well, you can imagine how many opportunists in the world said, hey, I have 1 million N95 masks, I'll sell them to you if the price is right. And unfortunately, there are a lot of scammers out there as well who said, hey, nobody wants to take my money as a Nigerian prince anymore. I will now try to sell people a bunch of N95 masks. And we saw that. And so our hospitals were finding people wanted them to wire money before they could get these supplies. Eventually, we realized SCbio members were helping us vet the Department of Commerce, as you said, and also the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. So many people in so many organizations began contributing the supply they had and retooling their manufacturing processes to produce PPE that they had never made before. That has become an extraordinary effort. But there were so many people and organizations, and then requesters on the other side. We built, with your help, a website that lets everyone go to a central place, and it became essentially the shopping mall or the market for PPE, and that is the website sccovid19.org. Thanks to you again and your team for helping us do that.
It's been a very satisfying experience for us, and again, we're humbled by all the partnerships that are in play right now. Before we wrap with you, Thornton, and maybe Dr. Scheurer could weigh on this at all as well. You mentioned in your opening remarks high reliability science. That's a new term for a lot of people. Clarify a little bit what that is and why it's mattered during COVID-19, and maybe Dr. Scheurer can follow you with that.
Well, she is one of our state's leading clinician experts on it and a great partner to SCHA. So I'll set her up and let her talk about how it works in a clinical setting. But I alluded before that hospitals are troubled by the fact that we have errors and mistakes in our work. And we look at other industries like the nuclear power industry or commercial aviation. They maintain very, very high safety records despite hazardous activity. How do they do that? They have many similarities, and there's emerged this science of high reliability that can explain why those industries have succeeded in safety the way we would like to in healthcare. So we have studied that as a state. We have worked with the Joint Commission over the last 5 or 6 years to get started, and our hospitals have picked it up and run with it. MUSC is one of our leaders in the state. PRISMA and others are very active in it as well. But the bottom line is you have to come to work. Every single person has to come to work with a mindset that something could go wrong, and I'm going to find it before that happens. We're going to prevent things from happening, not wait for them to happen. And Matthew and I started in my legal career with Nexsen Pruet. We've seen the end result when you don't catch a problem and it becomes a medical error. We don't want that to happen. How do you get way back upstream, break the chain of events so that that consequence never happens to the patient? And that's what we've been working on. We've implemented that through the floods of 2015 in this state, many other floods, hurricanes, and we continue to learn how to preoccupy ourselves with failure, how to focus on safety, how to defer to people at the front line of the work. And we keep getting better. We're not perfect, but we get better and better every time we're challenged on this. So Danielle, I'd turn it to you and let you comment on how this theory applies in a clinical setting.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been a core competency, I would say, and a core focus for MUSC Health for almost a decade. And the core components really are, deep leadership training around high reliability, having a robust, what we call process improvement. So when you find things are not going well, can you quickly pivot with a trained team to make it better? And then the third facet is around a lot of what Thornton was referring to is this concept of a culture of safety, which essentially is that people have to feel safe reporting problems. There has to be an incredible, deep and wide air of transparency. There has to be a deep core belief in adopting what we call a learning culture, which is an eagerness to find things that are not going well and an eagerness to make it better. And then last but not least, what we call a just culture. So when people report, They have to feel very secure that they're going to be treated fairly and with respect. Again, with an eye toward learning from failure, not it's reporting problems, not people. And so we have applied those principles in all of our leadership training, our reporting systems, our good catches, our entire reward and recognition system to build up that culture. And it does, as Thornton referred to, it's great to be prepared. We spend, every healthcare system in the state spends an incredible amount of time in preparedness on different fronts, whether it's a pandemic or a hurricane or other event. But at the end of the day, you cannot possibly be prepared for everything. And so the principles of high reliability do allow for quick shifts and agility in preparedness. And again, back to that core belief around deference to expertise. So it does allow people and organizations to quickly shift to a new focus. And certainly COVID is a great example of a rapid, agile shift to a new, relatively unexpected change in our book of business.
Oh, very good.
Sam, if I could add one last thought. Sam, this is not just talk in South Carolina. As she said, we've been doing this about a decade in hospitals. And our board of the Hospital Association back in 2013 said we want to recognize hospitals that can demonstrate they can go 12 full months without a certain type of harm event. And we hoped we might find a few in our state at that time. Since 2013, South Carolina hospitals have earned 750 zero harm awards. And these hospitals on the line are two of the ones that have earned many because they have demonstrated it is possible to go at protracted periods of time without a harm event to patients. We're resetting the bar in South Carolina. Not many people know that, but we're very proud of the clinicians in our hospitals that are changing the way we deliver care.
Data-based information. I mean, that's powerful and compelling to hear. And I'm going to segue it. Questions are flowing in. It's hard to believe we're down to 15 minutes left, and we could spend a lot more time. A couple of other important topics I'd like to get on the table. Public health. If you look at the crucial role of DHEC, the CDC at the federal level, et cetera, it's getting a lot of attention and a platform unlike I've seen in my lifetime. Dr. Litwin, how about tackle that for us for a minute? Just the importance of public health, what we've learned, and how, with this, I'm going to say, newfound attention around it, we might react differently in the future.
Absolutely. And I'll touch also at the end of my comments on the kind of strategies around PPE as well. But in terms of public health, again, I think it was said right by others beforehand that I think everyone now understands the importance that it's important for the health of individuals, public health, but also that all of our health is kind of together. And so the health of one community will directly impact the health of other communities. And so I think that's an important understanding. What's needed now, and a lot of great efforts are underway, are really continuing with our testing and our contact tracing and quarantine, and putting up large epidemiological studies together with our partners, and particularly being mindful of our community-based organizations working together as we get treatments that are going to be useful in the outpatient space, and vaccines, which hopefully will come. We've heard different things, but perhaps as early as January, and more likely later than that. But we need to make sure we have a system so that we can implement these, right? So it's not just that we have the drug, but that there's access to these medications in various different venues, whether it's federally qualified healthcare centers or programs that treat addiction and that serve marginally housed individuals. But we have to be very creative, drive-through type programs so that we can deploy these innovative developments. And then touching on the idea that social determinants of health have always been important, things about isolation and loneliness, lack of or food insecurity or unstable housing, language issues. Those are always issues, and kind of being even bigger issues during such a large crisis. So we want to be mindful that as we develop these public health structures across the different plans that we're seeing, that we include the different populations and groups so that the interventions may have to be a little bit modified or tweaked so that everyone comes along, and populations that we talked about that are having undue disparities, including African American population, Latina population, and then the usual kind of marginalized groups such as people with addictions, those with unstable housing or mental health and other comorbidities. And finally, we know that the chronic diseases are kind of a double whammy here, right? So the people that have chronic diseases, or whether it's obesity or diabetes or heart failure or lung disease, are more apt to develop severe disease. But also, we need to make sure that we're continuing to take care of those diseases, the primary diseases as well, and so that people aren't, dying of heart attack and strokes, and are able to adhere to their, diabetes medications, and as there's disruptions in community, in society, that we're able to continue to take care of this. And what we've noticed in public health is that innovation is great and exhilarating, but as you innovate, often disparities will increase because, telemedicine has been wonderful, works great for kind of mainstream populations, but not everybody has a smartphone. Not everybody can see a camera. As we move forward to having, devices and stethoscopes and, otoscopes to check your ears at home, people may not have access to these types of things. And so we have to make sure we're working with our community partners so that innovations will continue to disseminate into all communities and not just a few communities. And just touch briefly on kind of the exciting aspects of kind of a local, depending on our own local expertise and resources in terms of PPE. Traditionally, healthcare organizations, as they should have, depended on large GPOs or group purchasing organizations. And during pre-COVID times, these served us very well. There were no major problems. But with COVID, we've heard about it. It's not just a hurricane in one place. Everyone is now trying to rely on this, so we're no longer special anymore in terms of being able to leverage resources. So really being able to depend on our local, partners, our local business partners, has been very, very heartwarming to understand, like, how we've been able to source, whether it's hand sanitizers or spray bottles or bulk disinfectants, culture tubes, swabs, face shields, really working with companies, like Mitsubishi, American Foam, paper cutters, Exxon, Milliken, Brentag, it goes on. And really, and I think that's going to be part of the conversation. And finally, we need to make sure that the conversation that public health and the economy work hand in hand. It's not either or. We can do it all. We can do this safely, but we got to make sure the economy is opened up as well, and we do it together, and that's by working together with the health systems and the structures and the institutions that are represented on this call, working with our businesses and our community-based organizations so we can open up the economy safely, but also understanding that if we don't open up the society, there can be detriment to the care of patients, the care of health systems in and of itself not being viable, and also chronic disease management and other conditions. So I'm going to stop there, Sam.
Okay, no, thanks, Alain. And let's say with less than 10 minutes to go, hard to believe, following on the theme of public health and reopening the economy safely, I'm going to throw it back for a quick answer before our final larger question to the panelists, to Matthew and Thornton, and ask you to maybe briefly touch on the very important intersection of government and healthcare, as well as some of the legalities of healthcare when we're operating in an unprecedented, let's call it a force majeure, global pandemic that we're still experiencing. Matthew, you want to touch on that?
Provider's perspective in our state, DHEC as the state health department has actually tremendous powers in the case of a state of emergency, which we've been in since March. And I've been very impressed with how careful DHEC has been about exerting those powers and how effective they've been at working with providers. There are still things that providers are working with DHEC to try to loosen up to the extent that they're applicable. Those are ongoing discussions, but I've been impressed with that because DHEC could be more heavy-handed than they have been. Other legal issues that we've faced that are interesting are you look for as hospitals, as large employers. They are employing lots of people doing lots of now potentially dangerous things with respect to interacting with people who might have COVID-19. And at the same time, they're dealing with immense financial pressures and facing layoffs and others and furloughs because their elective procedure revenue has been stopped. That created a lot of legal issues that we were really focusing on. And I hope, and this remains to be seen, that we address this either at the state or at the federal level, some type of immunity statute so that we will not clog the court systems when they reopen with a bunch of COVID-19 related litigation, whether it's someone suing because they got it or someone suing because they've been damaged because of something related to COVID-19. That's something we need to look at. But on the supply chain issue, I think we've got to look at making it easier for these things to be approved by FDA. It's got to be an easier process. They have expedited things through the emergency use authorization, but as Alain mentioned, we really ought to focus on having a domestic source for these PPE because we have the capacity. SCbio has members who are dying to get involved in that, and there will have to be some shared sacrifice. You might not be getting the N95 mask for what you used to get it for, but it will be coming from South Carolina, and it will be more reliable in terms of its quality and its availability. So those are some of the legal issues that just to highlight that we've been dealing with because of the pandemic.
And if I can, Thornton, because I know you're going to jump in for a minute, and maybe where I want to go with, we're kind of in the shootout session, 1 minute each, because we're down to 3 minutes pretty much. But let's just say on whether it's the intersection of government and healthcare or other issues that our clinicians that are most focused on, let's think about the pathway forward. And second half of 2020 going into 2021, no one has a crystal ball, but important takeaways and perspectives about that. And Matthew, I selfishly love what you just said. My question will be also, how can life sciences, that industry in South Carolina, be the strongest possible partner going forward to our healthcare partners?
So let me just jump in quickly. I'll try not to use an entire minute. When I took this job 15 years ago, even though I was a government major and a healthcare attorney, I was surprised by how political healthcare was. And then I really eventually realized, it's because our government taxes everyone and uses tax revenue to fund healthcare. So it's always going to be political. When we see events like this, what we see is an initial bipartisanship. People come together, let's do what we need to do, relax the regulations, pass a relief act. But eventually, as it dies down, we can't help ourselves falling back into partisan divides. And healthcare has been the source of a big partisan divide in this country for a decade now. So no big surprise there. I do think we've done a better job of educating our lawmakers, helping them understand health disparities, helping them understand the supply chain, helping them understand how healthcare works. That's where we need to invest our energy going forward.
Great answer. And then how about Dr. Litwin and then Dr. Scheurer to follow that? Final thoughts on the path forward from your perspective.
Absolutely. I'll just take a few moments here. Basically, the structures that we've learned through COVID-19, we're meeting frequently with our stakeholders. We do it rapidly, 30 minutes a day. As we move back, very, very quick here. Basically, the structures we developed for COVID-19, where we meet rapidly, 30 minutes daily, talking to all of our stakeholders, have been very useful. We need to continue these structures. We're not going to be able to meet every day as we open up our hospitals and back to our usual business. But we're going to okay, great. But we're going to continue meeting with our stakeholders actively and working on innovation post-COVID and then throughout the future. Thanks so much.
Thanks for that, Alain. And Danielle, can you?
And this is Danielle. Sure, I would just add kind of where I started with all this is I think the path forward is to deeply and intently listen to our patients and families and meet and exceed their needs. What they're telling us is whether it's emergency care, urgent care, telehealth, testing, etc.
Well, listen, we're at that magic 11 o'clock hour, and we could have spent another 2 hours easily. Cannot thank these four panelists enough for bringing their expertise and insights and frankly, compassion to this discussion. And it gives me great confidence as a South Carolinian that we're going to continue navigating successfully through this. Please stay in touch with scbio.org. We have other compelling webinars coming up. And again, thank you, Matthew, Thornton, Alain, and Danielle. Wonderful conversation. Bye-bye.